Flight staff calls, police on black woman for package. It's an award for her humanitarian work. The gentle hum of life in the airport terminal buzzed around Emily Carter as she stood near the check-in counter, quietly observing the sea of faces. Her figure was poised yet unassuming, draped in a navy trench coat that offset her warm brown skin. Her braided hair was tied neatly into a bun, a touch of practicality she always carried with her. Despite her unpretentious demeanor, there was a distinct grace in her presence that turned heads, though few lingered long enough to recognize it. Emily adjusted the strap of her leather case, the only item she carried apart from a modest handbag. She preferred to travel light, even after a monumental event like last night's ceremony. The weight of the gold plaque within the case felt heavier than it truly was an award for a decade of tireless work, bringing aid to conflict zones and advocating for marginalized communities. Yet, Emily bore it without pride, seeing it not as a symbol of achievement, but as a reminder of how much work was still left to do. Emily had always been this way, measured, thoughtful, and driven by a quiet strength. She didn't need recognition or applause to validate her efforts. It was the faces of children she had helped, the hope rekindled in the eyes of forgotten communities, that motivated her. These moments lived within her, far outweighing the golden accolades that others seemed to revere. Her modesty, however, often rendered her invisible to those who only valued loud displays of wealth and power. Today was no different. The bustling airport staff moved with the hurried indifference of routine, glancing past Emily as if she were just another passenger. And Emily, as she always did, let them. There was no need to demand attention or special treatment. As Emily moved toward the first-class check-in, memories of her journey replayed in her mind. Born in a small southern town, she had been raised by parents who worked tirelessly to ensure she never felt limited by their modest means. Her father, a school teacher, taught her the value of education, while her mother's quiet sacrifices instilled in her a deep empathy for others. She thought of the countless missions she had embarked on, from the dusty plains of drought-stricken villages to makeshift shelters in war zones. Each place had etched itself into her heart, shaping her into the woman she was today. Strong, resilient, and unshaken by the smallness of prejudice she sometimes encountered. But today that prejudice would come sharper and louder than she expected. As Emily approached the counter, she noticed the flight attendant, Anna, stealing a glance at her with a look that was hard to miss, a mix of curiosity and quiet judgment. Emily was no stranger to such looks. She'd encountered them countless times, especially when traveling first class. The unspoken question, does she really belong here? Emily maintained her composure, her calm demeanor a practiced armor against the subtle cuts of such encounters. She slid her boarding pass across the counter with a polite smile. "Good afternoon," she said softly, her voice steady yet warm. Anna took the boarding pass, her fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. She glanced up at Emily, then at the leather case slung over her shoulder. A flicker of something, doubt, suspicion, crossed her face. Emily caught it, but said nothing. "Are you traveling alone today?" Anna's tone was light, but her eyes were searching, prying. "Yes," Emily replied, her answer simple and unyielding. She could sense the judgment creeping into the air between them, but she wouldn't let it touch her. Standing there, Emily was the picture of composure, her posture straight but not rigid, her eyes calm but not cold. Inside, she felt a twinge of exhaustion, not from the travel, but from the constant necessity of proving herself in spaces where her presence was questioned. She had learned long ago to channel that exhaustion into resolve. Today would be no different. As Anna typed on her keyboard, Emily adjusted the strap of her case once more. She thought of the award within a testament to years of sacrifice and perseverance. It wasn't the kind of thing she ever flaunted, but in this moment she couldn't help but feel its presence as a silent reminder of her worth, a worth that went far beyond the prejudices of strangers. The airport intercom crackled above her, calling for passengers to board another flight. Emily listened absently, her mind already preparing for the long journey ahead. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a much longer ordeal. The click of keys at the check-in counter seemed louder than usual, almost deliberate. Emily remained silent, observing Anna as she typed, the woman's fingers moving with a pace that suggested hesitation rather than efficiency. The air felt heavier now, the kind of subtle tension Emily had come to recognize. She had encountered it in boardrooms, customs lines, even at fundraising galas, moments where assumptions were made before words were spoken. Anna glanced at Emily again, her gaze sharper this time, zeroing in on the leather case slung over her shoulder. Her lips pressed together as if she were holding back a question or perhaps an accusation. The pause stretched just a moment too long, enough for Emily to notice. "Is there an issue with my boarding pass?" Emily asked softly, her tone calm but firm. She wasn't confrontational by nature, but she knew the importance of holding her ground in moments like these. Anna looked up, startled, as if caught in the act of something she didn't want to admit. "No, not at all," she said quickly, her voice carrying a forced politeness. But her eyes flicked to the case again. Emily followed her gaze, understanding immediately where this was heading. She had experienced enough of these moments to recognize the signs, the suspicious looks, the hesitant behavior, the unspoken yet palpable question of whether she belonged. Anna cleared her throat, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "What's in the case?" she asked, her tone casual, almost conversational, but with an edge that betrayed her true intent. Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised by the abruptness of the question. "Just some personal items," she replied evenly. She kept her voice steady, refusing to give Anna the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. Anna tilted her head, feigning curiosity. "Personal items. It looks important. Is it a work document or something valuable?" Emily's grip on the strap of her case tightened slightly. She wasn't one to flaunt her accomplishments, and explaining the significance of the award felt unnecessary. "It's nothing to worry about," she said simply. But Anna wasn't satisfied. Her eyes narrowed, and the forced smile on her lips faded. "You'll need to open it," she said, her voice firmer now, with a hint of authority. Emily blinked, her calm exterior unshaken, but her patience wearing thin. "Excuse me?" "It's protocol," Anna replied quickly, her words rehearsed but not convincing. "We're required to inspect anything that looks unusual." Emily's chest tightened at the word unusual. She glanced around the counter, noticing that no other passengers were being subjected to this level of scrutiny. A man in a business suit had just checked in without so much as a second glance from the staff. She turned her attention back to Anna, her gaze steady. "Are you implying that my belongings are suspicious?" Anna straightened, clearly uncomfortable with the accusation. No, of course not. I'm just doing my job." Her voice was defensive now, and she avoided meeting Emily's eyes. The moments dragged on, each second amplifying the unease between them. Passengers in the nearby line began to notice the interaction, their curious glances adding to the weight of the situation. Emily took a slow breath, willing herself to remain composed. She had learned long ago that anger, however justified, could be weaponized against her in situations like this. "I don't see anyone else being asked to open their belongings," she said, her voice steady but pointed. Anna flinched, her discomfort evident. "I'm not targeting you, ma'am," she said quickly, but the words rang hollow. "It's just standard procedure." Emily's lips tightened. She wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that Anna's behavior wasn't rooted in prejudice, but the patterns were too familiar to ignore. "If it's standard procedure," she said calmly, "then I assume you'll be asking everyone else to open their bags as well." Anna hesitated, her confidence faltering under Emily's steady gaze. She glanced around, as if searching for backup, before leaning closer to the microphone on her counter. "Security to gate 14, she said softly, her voice low enough that most passengers couldn't hear. But Emily caught every word, and the weight of the situation sank in. She straightened, her posture firm but not defensive. "You're calling security over a leather case?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the tension. Anna's cheeks flushed, but she didn't back down. "It's just a precaution," she said quickly. "You understand, don't you? We have to ensure the safety of everyone here." Emily met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "Safety," she repeated, her voice quiet, yet resonant. She didn't need to say more. The weight of her tone said everything. The murmurs in the terminal grew louder as passengers began to pay closer attention. A mother pulled her child closer, whispering something Emily couldn't hear. A man with a newspaper lowered it, his eyes narrowing as he watched the scene unfold. Emily remained still, her heart pounding but her exterior calm. She had learned to carry herself with grace in moments like this, to project strength even when her patience was being tested. As the sound of approaching footsteps echoed behind her, Emily turned slightly, her gaze meeting the uniformed security officers making their way toward the counter. The real conflict was about to begin. The low thud of approaching boots against the polished airport floor sent ripples of tension through the terminal. Emily stood her ground, her posture unyielding yet unthreatening, as the security officers neared the check-in counter. The curious murmur of passengers around her grew louder, a faint buzz of unease spreading through the air. Anna, emboldened by the arrival of reinforcements, straightened her shoulders and gestured toward Emily with a clipped wave. "Right here," she said, her voice adopting a tone of authority that seemed exaggerated, even unnecessary. Emily's eyes flicked to the officers, two men, each clad in dark uniforms with badges glinting under the harsh airport lights. Their faces were impassive, practiced in neutrality, but Emily could feel the weight of their scrutiny as their gazes landed on her. The taller of the two officers, a man with a stern jaw and a closely cropped haircut, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we were called to address a potential security concern. Can you explain the situation?" Emily tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but firm. "Perhaps Anna," she gestured subtly toward the flight attendant, "can explain why my belongings are suddenly a matter of security." Anna bristled at the subtle jab, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I was following protocol," she said, addressing the officer but glancing briefly at Emily. "The case she's carrying seemed unusual. I thought it was better to err on the side of caution." The officer nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the leather case at Emily's side. "Is this the item in question?" he asked, pointing toward it. Emily lifted the case slightly, her fingers tightening around the strap. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "It contains personal belongings. I've already passed through standard security screening without issue." Anna, sensing her control of the narrative slipping, interjected. "She refused to open it when I asked," she said quickly. "I was just trying to ensure the safety of everyone here." Emily's lips tightened. She turned her gaze to Anna, her voice calm but sharp. "I didn't refuse. I said it wasn't necessary. There's a difference." The officer raised a hand, signaling for calm. "Ma'am," he said to Emily, "we'd like to inspect the contents of the case, just to clear up any misunderstanding. This will only take a moment." Emily's heart sank slightly, though she didn't let it show. She knew the game all too well, the subtle power plays, the veneer of politeness masking an assumption of guilt. But she also knew the importance of maintaining composure. "Under what grounds?" she asked, her tone measured. "I've complied with every security procedure, and I've done nothing to warrant this additional scrutiny." The officer hesitated, clearly caught between protocol and the growing unease of the watching crowd. Anna, however, stepped in, her voice growing sharper. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be," she said, her frustration evident. "If you have nothing to hide, why not just cooperate?" Emily's gaze snapped to Anna, her composure briefly giving way to a flicker of irritation. "Cooperation doesn't mean tolerating baseless accusations," she said, her voice firm but still controlled. "I've done nothing wrong, and you know it." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a few passengers exchanging knowing glances. A woman nearby whispered to her companion, her tone dripping with disapproval. "This is so unnecessary," she said, loud enough for Anna to hear. Anna's cheeks flushed, and she glared briefly at the woman before turning back to Emily. "If you have nothing to hide," she repeated, her voice harder now, "then prove it." Emily stood silently for a moment, her eyes locking with Anna's. The seconds stretched, heavy with tension, as if the entire terminal was holding its breath. Finally, she let out a slow, measured sigh and adjusted the strap of the case on her shoulder. "If it'll put this nonsense to rest," she said quietly, "then fine." She placed the case on the counter and carefully unzipped it, her movements deliberate. As the lid opened, the polished surface of the gold plaque inside caught the light, its engraved lettering shimmering. For a moment, there was only silence. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from suspicion to surprise. Anna, however, simply stared at the plaque, her lips parting slightly as she read the words engraved on its surface. Humanitarian of the Year, United Nations. Emily reached into the case and lifted the plaque, holding it up for everyone to see. "This," she said, her voice calm but tinged with a quiet defiance, "is what you deemed suspicious." The murmurs in the crowd turned into audible gasps and whispers. A man in a business suit shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." Anna's face turned scarlet, her bravado crumbling under the weight of her mistake. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her hands fidgeted nervously at her sides, her composure unraveling with each passing second. The taller officer cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his tone conciliatory. Emily turned to him, her gaze steady. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice low but resonant. "Is that what we're calling it?" The tension in the air shifted. Passengers who had been silent observers began to voice their opinions more openly. "She's a humanitarian, for God's sake," someone muttered. "This is what happens when you make assumptions," another said, casting a pointed look at Anna. The whispers grew louder, a ripple of discontent spreading through the terminal. Anna looked around, her discomfort palpable. Emily, still holding the plaque, met Anna's gaze one last time. "You didn't ask about my case because it looked unusual," she said quietly but firmly. "You asked because I did." Anna opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips. The officers shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to proceed. The weight of the crowd's judgment pressed down on all of them, and for the first time, Anna seemed to realize the full extent of her actions. The tension hung in the air like an invisible storm, thick and unrelenting. Emily stood at the counter, her posture resolute as she clutched the golden plaque in her hands. Around her, the crowd's murmurs continued to grow, a cacophony of indignation and disbelief at the unfolding scene. From the corner of her eye, Emily saw two uniformed police officers approaching, their purposeful strides cutting through the terminal's bustle. The taller one, Officer Harris, was a middle-aged man with a square jaw and piercing eyes that scanned the scene with practiced precision. His partner, Officer Morgan, a younger, wiry man with a nervous energy, followed close behind. Anna, whose confidence had begun to waver, visibly perked up at their arrival. She stepped toward them, her hands clasped in a show of deference, and gestured toward Emily as if presenting a problem to be solved. "Officers," Anna began, her voice trembling slightly but still clinging to an air of authority, "this is the individual I called about. She was behaving uncooperatively and refused to open her bag when asked." Emily let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the edges of the plaque. She watched as the officers shifted their attention to her, their gazes assessing. The familiar prickle of being scrutinized washed over her, but she remained outwardly composed. Officer Harris stepped forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor. He stopped a few feet from Emily, his stance deliberately neutral. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we're here to address a reported security concern." May I ask for your cooperation in resolving this matter? Emily met his gaze steadily. I've already complied, she said, her voice measured. She lifted the plaque slightly, letting its golden surface catch the light. This is what your colleague found suspicious enough to warrant your presence. Harris's eyes flicked to the plaque, and a faint crease appeared on his forehead. He leaned forward slightly, reading the engraved words. His partner, Officer Morgan, moved closer, peering over his shoulder. A humanitarian award? Morgan muttered under his breath, his tone laced with confusion. Anna, sensing the officer's hesitation, quickly interjected. I didn't know what it was at first, she said defensively. She refused to explain and acted evasively. Emily turned to Anna, her expression a picture of calm incredulity. I acted evasively, she repeated, her voice quiet but sharp, by calmly stating that the contents of my case were personal. Anna flinched at the words, her confidence faltering. Well, it's not just about the case, she stammered. Her behavior. It seemed suspicious. Harris straightened, his expression unreadable as he turned back to Emily. Ma'am, he began carefully, while we're obligated to investigate all reported concerns, it does appear that there's been some misunderstanding here. Emily raised an eyebrow, her calm exterior unshaken. A misunderstanding, she echoed, her voice laced with quiet defiance. That seems to be the word of the day. Morgan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Harris and Anna. Maybe we should, he began, but Harris cut him off with a subtle gesture. Ma'am, Harris said, addressing Emily directly, if you're willing, we'd like to document this situation for clarity. It's standard procedure in cases like these. Emily studied him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. She could see the discomfort in his eyes, the awareness that this was more than just a routine incident. Finally, she gave a small nod. If it means resolving this without further escalation, I'm willing. As Harris began taking notes, Morgan turned to Anna, his tone more pointed now. Can you clarify exactly why you felt the need to involve us? He asked. Anna hesitated, her confidence visibly crumbling under the weight of the crowd's judgment and the officer's scrutiny. I was following protocol, she said weakly. Her case looked unusual, and I thought it was better to be safe. Morgan frowned, clearly unconvinced. Did she threaten anyone? Raise her voice? Act aggressively? Anna opened her mouth to respond, but faltered. No, she admitted reluctantly, her voice barely audible. The crowd, emboldened by Anna's admission, began to speak louder. This is ridiculous, one man said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. She's clearly being targeted. Absolutely, a woman chimed in. This is racial profiling, plain and simple. Emily remained silent, letting the voices of the crowd speak the truth she didn't need to articulate herself. She had learned long ago that sometimes silence carried more power than words. Harris, sensing the shift in the room's energy, turned back to Emily. Ma'am, we'll ensure that this is properly documented, he said, his tone apologetic. You're free to proceed to your flight. Emily nodded, her composure intact, but as she reached for her case, she paused, her gaze locking on Anna. I hope you'll think twice next time, she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the entire terminal. Not just about what you assume, but about the harm those assumptions can cause. Anna's face crumpled, the color draining from her cheeks as the gravity of her actions sank in. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, she looked away, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her guilt. The officers stepped aside, allowing Emily to pass. The crowd parted for her, their murmurs of support and admiration following her as she walked toward the boarding gate. Her stride was steady, her head held high, a silent testament to her resilience. As the terminal buzzed with renewed energy, Anna remained rooted to the spot, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. The golden plaque, now etched into her memory, glimmered faintly as Emily disappeared into the distance. The hum of the airport terminal seemed to quiet as Emily's figure receded toward the boarding gates, her poised stride a stark contrast to the chaos she left behind. Passengers lingered, their whispers growing louder in Anna's ears, each one an accusation she couldn't ignore. "She handled that with so much grace," an elderly woman murmured, shaking her head. "I wouldn't have been so calm." "Can you believe it?" a man said, his voice tinged with anger. "A humanitarian award, and they treated her like a criminal." Anna stood frozen, her hands gripping the counter as if it might anchor her in place. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation drained away, leaving behind a hollow pit of shame. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, their judgment heavy and suffocating. The younger officer Morgan turned back to Anna, his expression a mix of disbelief and irritation. "You really thought that case was suspicious?" he asked, his tone low but cutting. Anna flushed, her gaze darting to the side. "I was just trying to do my job," she muttered. But even she didn't believe her own excuse anymore. Morgan crossed his arms, his voice sharp. "Your job isn't to make baseless assumptions, especially when someone has done nothing wrong. Do you realize how bad this looks? Not just for you, but for everyone involved?" Anna swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had no response. She could only watch as the officers exchanged a look before walking away, leaving her to face the growing resentment of the passengers. One by one, passengers began to voice their thoughts more openly. A middle-aged man with a briefcase stepped forward, his voice stern. "You owe that woman an apology," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. "You didn't just inconvenience her, you insulted her, and all because of what? Your assumptions?" Anna's face burned, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. She tried to focus on the task in front of her, straightening the counter and avoiding eye contact, but the voices kept coming. "It's not enough to just brush this off," another woman said, her tone firm. "People like her face this kind of treatment every day. It's unacceptable." Meanwhile, Emily reached the boarding gate, her mind heavy with the events that had just unfolded. She clutched the golden plaque in her hands, the weight of its meaning conflicting with the bitterness of the moment. Sitting in the quiet of the first-class lounge, she replayed the confrontation in her mind, the condescension in Anna's tone, the quiet humiliation of being forced to defend herself in front of strangers. But as much as it stung, Emily reminded herself of the faces she had helped, the lives she had changed. This wasn't the first time she'd faced prejudice, and it wouldn't be the last, but she refused to let it define her. Back at the counter, Anna's manager, a tall woman named Evelyn with a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor, approached with brisk steps. She had clearly been alerted to the situation and wasted no time in addressing it. "Anna," Evelyn began, her tone clipped, "I've been hearing quite a bit about what just happened here. Care to explain?" Anna hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find the right words. I thought I was following protocol," she stammered. "The case looked unusual, and I wanted to be cautious." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her voice growing colder. "Cautious? From what I've gathered, you targeted a passenger without any legitimate cause. A passenger who, by the way, happens to be a globally recognized humanitarian." Anna flinched at the sharpness in Evelyn's tone, her head hanging low. "I didn't mean—" Evelyn cut her off. "Intent doesn't erase impact, Anna. What you did reflects poorly on you, this team, and the entire airline, and now I have to clean up the mess you've made." The passengers who had witnessed the confrontation began to gather around Evelyn, their voices demanding accountability. "She owes that woman an apology," one man said, his face flushed with anger. Evelyn raised a hand to calm the crowd, though her expression was tense. "I understand your frustration, and I assure you this matter will be handled appropriately. The airline does not tolerate discrimination in any form." But the passengers weren't satisfied with platitudes. "An apology isn't enough," a woman said. "You need to ensure this never happens again." Evelyn nodded, her jaw tight. "We will be conducting a full review of our policies and providing additional training to our staff. But for now, I will personally ensure that the passenger involved is contacted and offered our sincerest apologies." As Emily sat in the lounge, sipping a glass of water to steady her nerves, Evelyn approached, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and determination. She carried a sleek envelope in her hands, bearing the airline's logo. "Ms. Carter," Evelyn began, her voice measured, "I'd like to personally apologize for the treatment you received earlier. It was unacceptable, and I assure you, steps are being taken to address it." Emily looked up, her expression unreadable. She studied Evelyn for a moment before nodding. "I appreciate your apology," she said, her tone calm but distant. "But words alone won't change what happened." Evelyn's lips tightened, and she extended the envelope. "As a gesture of goodwill, the airline would like to offer you complimentary flights for the next year. We hope this can, in some small way, make up for the inconvenience." Emily took the envelope but didn't open it. Instead, she placed it on the table beside her. "Thank you," she said simply, though her tone carried little warmth. As Evelyn left, Emily leaned back in her seat, the envelope untouched. She didn't need free flights or empty promises. What she wanted was something far more meaningful, a shift in how people like Anna viewed the world, a world where judgments weren't made based on skin color or assumptions. The boarding announcement broke through her thoughts, and she rose, her golden plaque tucked securely under her arm. The journey ahead was long, but Emily had always been willing to go the distance for what mattered most. The terminal quieted as Emily boarded her flight, the events at the counter now a murmur receding behind her. But the aftermath of the confrontation rippled outward, igniting a storm within the airline's corporate offices. Miles away, in a sleek glass building overlooking the city, a video of the incident landed in the inbox of Richard Hawthorne, the airline's CEO. The email's subject line read, "Urgent. Incident at Gate 14. Potential PR disaster." Richard, a composed man in his late 50s with sharp grey eyes and a reputation for decisiveness, clicked the attachment. As the footage played, his expression darkened, his jaw tightening with every second. The video, captured by a passenger's phone, clearly showed the humiliation Emily had endured and the unjust escalation that followed. Richard leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Get Evelyn from the terminal and Alan from legal in my office immediately," he said, his voice clipped. Minutes later, Evelyn entered, her face pale. Alan, a middle-aged lawyer with a meticulous demeanor, followed closely behind, clutching a leather portfolio. Both took seats across from Richard, their nervous energy palpable. "Have either of you seen this?" Richard asked, gesturing to his laptop where the video played on loop. Evelyn nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I was there," she admitted. "I've already spoken to the passenger involved and offered an apology." Richard's gaze sharpened. "An apology," he repeated, his tone icy. "Evelyn, do you think a few kind words and a complimentary flight voucher are enough to fix this? This isn't just an inconvenience. This is a failure on every level." Alan cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. "We need to assess the legal exposure here," he began cautiously. "If Ms. Carter decides to pursue a discrimination lawsuit, the optics alone could be catastrophic. Not to mention, the evidence in this video would make it difficult to defend." Richard slammed the laptop shut, the sharp sound cutting through the room. "Forget the lawsuit for a moment," he said. "What about the damage to our reputation? We position ourselves as an airline committed to diversity and inclusivity. How does this incident fit into that narrative?" Evelyn shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "The employee involved, Anna, acted independently," she said. "We can handle it internally, disciplinary action, mandatory sensitivity training, whatever's necessary." Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Handling it internally won't erase what happened. This is bigger than Anna. This is about the culture we've allowed to fester. And now we're paying the price." Richard instructed Alan to draft a formal statement acknowledging the incident and promising corrective action. Meanwhile, Evelyn was tasked with initiating a full investigation into the training and practices at the terminal. Anna, now sequestered in a back office, was the first to be called in for questioning. Her hands trembled as she sat across from Evelyn, her eyes red from tears she hadn't allowed anyone to see. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Anna said, her voice shaky. "I was just trying to follow protocol." Evelyn's tone was cold. "Protocol doesn't excuse prejudice. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? You didn't just embarrass yourself, you embarrassed this entire airline, and you've jeopardized your career in the process." Anna's tears spilled over, her voice breaking. "I didn't realize. I didn't think." "That's the problem," Evelyn snapped. "You didn't think." Meanwhile, high above the clouds in first class, Emily sat by the window, gazing out at the endless expanse of sky. The golden plaque rested in her lap, its polished surface reflecting the faint glow of the cabin lights. Despite the quiet around her, Emily's mind was anything but still. She replayed the confrontation over and over, the sting of Anna's suspicion still fresh. Yet, beneath the frustration, there was a familiar resilience. This wasn't the first time she'd faced such prejudice, and she doubted it would be the last. But every experience like this only strengthened her resolve to fight for change. A flight attendant approached, her demeanor markedly different from Anna's. She spoke softly, her tone respectful. "Miss Carter, can I get you anything? A drink? Something to eat?" Emily looked up, offering a polite smile. "Just water, please," she said. As the attendant left, Emily thought about the people in the terminal who had spoken out on her behalf. Strangers who had seen the injustice and refused to stay silent. It was moments like those that gave her hope, that reminded her that change was possible, even if it came slowly. Back at the airline headquarters, Richard finalized the statement, choosing each word with care. He knew that every syllable would be dissected by the media, by activists, by millions of people who would see the incident as emblematic of broader systemic issues. The statement was released within hours, acknowledging the failure and promising accountability. It was accompanied by a direct apology to Emily, which Richard ensured was sent to her personally. As Emily disembarked at her destination, her phone buzzed with a notification. Opening the email, she read the CEO's words carefully. The apology was well written, sincere in tone, and included a commitment to supporting her humanitarian efforts through a significant donation. Emily closed the email and placed her phone in her bag. While she appreciated the gesture, she knew the real test would be in the actions that followed. Promises of change were easy to make, but harder to keep. As she stepped into the terminal, greeted by the warmth of her destination, Emily resolved to use this experience not as a source of anger, but as fuel for her mission. The plaque in her hand wasn't just a symbol of her achievements, it was a reminder of the work still left to do. The warm air of the tropical city wrapped around Emily like a comforting embrace as she exited the terminal. The bustling energy of the streets was a stark contrast to the tension she had left behind at the airport. Taxis honked as they navigated the chaotic traffic, and street vendors called out to passing travelers, their voices blending into the vibrant symphony of city life. Emily pulled her scarf closer around her shoulders, the fabric a soft barrier against the lingering weight of the day's events. She hailed a taxi, her movements practiced and deliberate. Despite her calm demeanor, her mind churned with thoughts of what had happened. As the taxi wove through the crowded streets, Emily gazed out the window, her expression contemplative. The neon signs and bustling pedestrians blurred together, her thoughts turning inward. She replayed Anna's condescending tone, the pointed stares of the officers, the murmurs of the passengers. It wasn't the first time she had experienced such prejudice, but the sting of it never faded completely. Her phone vibrated in her bag, breaking her reverie. Pulling it out, she saw an email notification from the airline's CEO, Richard Hawthorne. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. The words were carefully chosen, each sentence crafted to convey remorse and a commitment to change. Richard acknowledged the failure of his staff and took personal responsibility for the incident. He offered not only a formal apology, but also a promise, a donation to her humanitarian organization, and an invitation to collaborate on diversity training for the airline's employees. Emily's brow furrowed as she read. While the gesture was appreciated, she knew the weight of empty promises. Words, no matter how well-intentioned, could not undo the harm caused. Yet she also recognized an opportunity, one that could potentially spark real change. The taxi pulled up to a small but elegant hotel nestled in the heart of the city. Emily stepped out, the sound of her heels clicking softly against the cobblestone driveway. The doorman greeted her warmly, taking her suitcase as she made her way inside. In the quiet of her suite, Emily set her golden plaque on the desk, its gleaming surface catching the soft light of the room. She sat down beside it, her fingers tracing the engraved letters. The award was a testament to her work, but it also served as a reminder of the uphill battle she faced, not just in war zones or disaster areas, but in everyday spaces where prejudice lingered. After a moment of contemplation, Emily picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. The voice on the other end answered quickly, warm and full of concern. "Emily, how are you? I saw the news. Are you okay?" It was Claire, her closest friend and fellow activist. Claire had been a constant presence in Emily's life, her fiery passion a complement to Emily's quiet resilience. "I'm fine," Emily said, her voice steady but tinged with weariness. "It wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last. But this time, I want to do something about it." Claire's tone turned serious. "What are you thinking?" Emily glanced at the email on her phone. The airline's CEO reached out. He wants to collaborate on diversity training for their staff. "I'm considering it." Claire paused, her silence thoughtful. "It could be a chance to make a real impact," she said finally. "But only if they're truly committed to change." Emily nodded, her resolve solidifying. "I'm going to set conditions," she said. "If they're serious, I want full transparency. I want to be involved in the process from start to finish, and I want to ensure this isn't just a PR stunt." Claire's voice warmed with approval. "That's the Emily I know. Hold them accountable." They spoke for a while longer, discussing the logistics and potential challenges of such an initiative. By the time they hung up, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. Emily turned to her laptop, opening a blank email. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before she began to type. Each word was deliberate, her tone firm but respectful. She outlined her expectations clearly. Comprehensive diversity training, a public acknowledgement of systemic issues, and a commitment to long-term change. She reread the email twice before sending it, her finger lingering over the send button for just a moment. When it was done, she leaned back in her chair, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the window, Emily prepared for a day of meetings with local partners for her humanitarian projects. But even as she focused on her immediate work, the events at the airport remained at the forefront of her mind. She knew the path ahead would be challenging. Changing an institution's culture was no small task, and there would undoubtedly be resistance. But Emily had spent her life facing challenges head-on, and this would be no different. The golden plaque on the desk caught her eye as she gathered her things. She picked it up, her reflection shimmering in its polished surface. It wasn't just a symbol of her past accomplishments, it was a reminder of the power she carried to shape the future. As she stepped out into the bustling streets, Emily felt a renewed sense of determination. The incident at the airport had been a moment of pain, but it had also become a catalyst for action. And Emily, with her quiet strength and unwavering resolve, was ready to turn that pain into progress. The world wasn't perfect, but she was determined to leave it better than she had found it. One step, one conversation, one act of courage at a time. The email Emily had sent the night before set off a series of events she could scarcely have imagined. Within hours, Richard Hawthorne, the CEO of the airline, responded with an unequivocal acceptance of her terms. He promised full transparency and a commitment to real, systemic change. His swift reply surprised Emily, not because she doubted his sincerity, but because such enthusiasm for meaningful action was rare in her experience. By mid-morning, news of the airline's collaboration with Emily began to spread. A press release detailed the airline's partnership with a humanitarian organization to implement comprehensive diversity training across all levels of staff. It also acknowledged the failures exposed in the airport incident and pledged to establish ongoing initiatives to address racial prejudice within the company. The release struck a chord with the public. Within hours, social media platforms buzzed with reactions. Hashtags like "Justice with Emily" and "Her Airline Accountability" trended worldwide. Emily sat in her hotel room, scrolling through the posts. Some were encouraging. Finally, a company taking real steps toward accountability. Proud of Emily for turning something painful into progress. This is how you lead, by using your voice and your platform for change. Thank you, Emily. Others were skeptical. Let's see how long this commitment lasts. Corporations always talk big after they get caught. Hope this isn't just another PR stunt. Actions speak louder than press releases. Emily understood both sentiments. Trust couldn't be rebuilt with promises alone. It had to be earned through consistent, tangible action. 2 days later, Emily agreed to a televised interview with a respected journalist, Diane Reynolds. Sitting in a minimalist studio, Emily wore a soft grey blouse, her demeanor calm yet purposeful. Across from her, Diane leaned forward, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Emily," Diane began, "you've chosen to work with the very company responsible for the incident that sparked this controversy. Many people admire your decision, but some question it. Why did you agree to collaborate instead of taking legal action or walking away entirely?" Emily took a moment before responding, her voice steady. "Because I believe in the power of change. Legal action might have punished a few individuals, but it wouldn't have addressed the root cause of what happened. By collaborating with the airline, I have the opportunity to influence a system that affects millions of people. This isn't just about me, it's about creating a future where no one has to endure what I did." Diane nodded, her expression thoughtful. Some critics say corporations often make promises like this to save face, only to fall back into old patterns once the public's attention moves on. How do you plan to hold them accountable? Emily leaned forward slightly, her tone firm. Accountability starts with transparency. I've made it clear to the airline that this can't be a one-time initiative. There will be follow-ups, measurable outcomes, and public reporting. And if they fail to deliver, I won't hesitate to call them out. The interview aired that evening, drawing millions of viewers. Emily's words resonated deeply, sparking discussions in homes, workplaces, and classrooms. News outlets covered the story extensively, framing Emily as a beacon of resilience and a catalyst for change. Community leaders and activists praised her approach. Emily Carter is showing us what it means to lead with grace and determination. Her collaboration with the airline could set a new standard for corporate accountability. This is a blueprint for how we can address systemic issues by working within the system to dismantle it from the inside. However, not all reactions were positive. Some accused Emily of being too forgiving. This airline doesn't deserve a second chance. They humiliated her, and now they get to look like heroes because of her goodwill. Emily read these criticisms with an open heart, understanding the pain and anger behind them. But she remained resolute in her belief that meaningful change required patience and persistence. A week later, Richard Hawthorne called Emily directly. His tone was earnest, almost reverent. "Emily, I wanted to thank you personally for your willingness to work with us. The response has been overwhelming, not just from the public, but from our employees. Many of them are deeply invested in making this right." Emily appreciated his words, but responded cautiously. "It's a start, Richard, but the real work is ahead of us. Commitments like these are easy to make when the spotlight is on. The challenge will be maintaining momentum once it fades. Richard hesitated before replying. You're right. That's why I want to propose something more long-term, a permanent advisory role for you within the company. Someone to keep us accountable and ensure this work continues. Emily considered the offer, recognizing the potential it held. Let me think about it, she said finally. I want to be sure that my involvement adds value, not just symbolism. That evening, as Emily reflected on the whirlwind of events, she received an email from a woman named Monica, a passenger who had witnessed the incident at the airport. The email was heartfelt and raw. Dear Miss Carter, I was there that day, watching everything unfold. I wanted to say something, but I hesitated. I regret that now. I've thought a lot about what happened, and it's changed the way I see the world. I've started speaking up more, even in small ways, because of you. Thank you for showing us what courage and grace look like. Emily read the email twice, her chest tightening with emotion. It wasn't just about the system she hoped to change, it was about the people she could inspire along the way. As the night deepened, Emily sat by her hotel window, the city lights flickering in the distance. The golden plaque rested on the table beside her, a silent reminder of both her achievements and the challenges that remained. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but Emily was no stranger to difficult journeys. With every step, she carried the quiet strength that had brought her this far and the unwavering belief that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change. The days turned into weeks, and the airline's collaboration with Emily became a focal point of public conversation. What began as a response to a single incident had evolved into a broader reckoning, a commitment not just to rectify the mistakes of the past, but to reshape the future. For Emily, the journey was both exhausting and fulfilling. She traveled frequently, meeting with the airline's leadership team, speaking to employees at every level, and working with experts to develop a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program. Each step was a reminder of the uphill battle she had chosen to fight, but it was also a testament to the power of perseverance. One morning, Emily found herself back at the airport where it had all begun. The terminal looked the same: bright lights, polished floors, the constant hum of movement. But to Emily, it felt different. She was here at the airline's request to observe the first session of their new diversity training program. Employees, from flight attendants to senior executives, gathered in a spacious conference room. A facilitator, an expert Emily had personally recommended, led the session with empathy and precision. As Emily watched, she noticed Anna sitting near the back. Her posture was tense, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Emily hadn't seen Anna since the day of the incident, but now she observed her quietly, noting the mix of discomfort and determination on her face. During a break in the session, Anna approached Emily hesitantly. Her steps were slow, her expression uncertain. When she finally stood before Emily, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Carter," she began, her eyes downcast, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, truly sorry. I was wrong, and I know that now. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt you in ways I can't take back." Emily studied Anna for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded, her voice calm. "Acknowledging it is the first step," she said. "What matters now is what you do moving forward." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I'm trying," she said. "I'll keep trying." Later that day, Emily joined Richard Hawthorne and other executives at a press conference to announce the airline's new initiatives. The room was filled with journalists, their cameras and microphones trained on the stage. Richard began with a heartfelt statement, acknowledging the airline's failures and outlining their plans for change. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she stepped forward, her presence commanding yet gentle. "This isn't about one incident or one company," she said, her voice resonating in the room. "It's about recognizing the ways in which bias, both overt and subtle, shapes our world. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without effort. But I believe in the power of collective action. Together, we can build a future where dignity and respect are not privileges, but rights." Her words were met with applause, but Emily remained composed. She wasn't here for accolades, she was here for impact. That evening, back in her hotel room, Emily called Claire. The familiar warmth of her friend's voice was a welcome reprieve after the long day. "You were amazing today," Claire said. "I saw the press conference. The way you spoke, it's like you were born for this." Emily chuckled softly. "I'm not sure I was born for it, but I've learned to step up when it matters." Claire's tone grew serious. "Do you ever think about what's next, after all of this?" Emily leaned back in her chair, staring out at the city lights. "I do," she admitted. "This work isn't something that ends. There's always more to do, more people to reach, more systems to change. But for now, I'm focusing on what's in front of me, one step at a time." In the weeks that followed, the impact of Emily's collaboration began to ripple outward. Other companies, inspired by the airline's actions, reached out to Emily, seeking guidance on implementing similar programs. Advocacy groups praised her work, calling it a blueprint for corporate accountability. But the greatest impact came from the people who felt seen and heard because of her efforts. Letters and emails poured in stories of individuals who had experienced prejudice but now felt empowered to speak up. Each message reminded Emily of why she had chosen this path, even when it was difficult. One evening, Emily returned home to her modest but welcoming apartment. She placed her travel bags by the door and walked into her living room, where the golden plaque rested on a shelf. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the engraved letters. For a moment, she let herself feel the weight of everything, the pain, the triumphs, the work still ahead. Then she placed the plaque back on the shelf, a faint smile touching her lips. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was merely a chapter, a moment of progress in a much larger story. And Emily, with her quiet strength and unwavering resolve, was ready to keep writing that story, one step at a time. As the world continued to turn, Emily's name became synonymous with resilience and justice. Her work reminded people that change was possible, even in the face of entrenched systems. And though she never sought the spotlight, her light continued to shine, illuminating the path for others to follow. Emily's story reminds us that even in the face of injustice, one person's courage can ignite meaningful change. Her determination turned a painful experience into a powerful movement, proving that accountability and compassion can reshape systems that once seemed unchangeable. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more powerful tales of resilience and justice. Let's continue sharing stories that make a difference together.